Wells Fargo CFO John Shrewsbury saying today, quote, people are just not buying homes. And while some, like Kevin O'Leary, may say they're not surprised, is it a cause for concern when the nation's largest mortgage originator says home sales are hitting a slump? Well, let's bring in national housing analyst Dani Babb for her thoughts on this one. Dani, were you surprised by these comments from Wells?
No, not surprised. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau changed the rules again this last year, and starting the beginning of this year, and they've basically taken out a lot of the incentives for banks to offer unique products. So anything above a 30-year mortgage, interest-only products, jumbo loans, anything above a 43% debt-to-income ratio, family formation has slowed because or delayed because of jobs and careers. I'm not surprised. Also, a lot of people are priced out of the market.
Yeah, it's been a big move, Jason.
Yeah, I would say it also fits in neatly, really, with the president's talk about student loans. I think that there's a real problem in terms of household formation here. You've created a new generation which is having a difficult time finding new jobs, finding a time to settle down or the money to settle down. I think also it speaks to the idea that monetary policy and regulatory policy are somewhat at odds, which is to say that monetary policy is extremely accommodative. By the same token, only about half of Dodd-Frank has been completed. So the regulatory apparatus is still quite restricted.
So do you think it gets worse, Jason and Dani both? I mean, I'd like you both to say just how bad you think things could get in the months ahead then.
I personally think things have bottomed, but I also am of the belief that things aren't going to get better, a lot better, anytime soon, that this is a long process under which you're going to have to restructure the U.S. economy.
Because, Dani, we also had Goldman's chief economist, Jan Hatzius, last hour, who's more bullish on the U.S. economy, says he thinks that move in people moving back home with their parents is going to reverse, even if it takes a little time. He says he's reasonably positive on the housing market.
Yeah, I think for the next couple of years we'll start to see some leveling off. Essentially, for the last 18 months, we've had an appreciation rate that's 5 to 6 times GDP. That's not sustainable. So if we're looking at 20% appreciation rates over the long term, I don't think that's going to happen. But are we going to see some leveling off and then maybe some more stable growth in the long term? I think so, and I think some of the foreclosure numbers point to that as well. And we also have, as he was just saying, the household formation factor is certainly playing a role. Jobs are playing a role, and pricing, people being priced out of the market.
I mean, that doesn't argue, Kevin, for people staying away from housing altogether, like you were saying last week. And having made those remarks, which we played a million times, do you want to temper that at all?
Not at all. I'm just pointing out that this asset class is no different than any other. You have to view it in the context of, let's say, the next 5 years. One thing we never talk about in housing, and certainly people that are considering forming a young family and buying one, is the transactional cost of doing this. The cost of actually going through the process of getting a mortgage, buying a home, paying the realtors, paying the land transfer taxes if there are any, paying all of those ends up being somewhere between 5 and 7%. Kelly, you can't guarantee me that in the next 5 years I'll get a 7% appreciation in this asset. That's why my argument is keep your money. Don't invest it in a mortgage. Invest it in something else, like maybe the market or bonds, which at least with certainty have some return, versus buying this asset class. I hate this asset class right now. In a rising rate environment,
isn't that when you're supposed to invest in something when everybody hates it? Before we go, Stephen, what would you say?
Well, I think it's interesting that we've become conditioned to be collectively rooting for housing to increase, which seems to make sense from an investment perspective. It does make sense, I admit. But if you're thinking in terms of a societal perspective, what that means is that everybody who wants to buy a home, they're facing inflation, except for the people who are cashing out, maybe downsizing. So I think in terms of thinking about income mobility and actual life mobility and job opportunities and life opportunities, this is not terrible news. I hate to say that to an investment audience, but that's the way I look at it. In terms of the transaction cost, I could not agree with you more. I mean, we've written about how realtors' fees are bizarrely relatively high, considering the way tradition and the internet and the economy. I mean, if you're buying stock, who's willing to pay 5 or 6% on a big lump of stock?
It doesn't happen. Pennies versus nickels.
We are indeed. So I think we're due for a change there. It's a long time in coming.
Dani, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate the perspective this hour.